Before I discuss Alan Wake's sequels, I wanted to talk about Alan Wake Remastered that came out last year. It is a pretty standard remaster with improved visuals, for the most part, and improved performance. The main reason the game needed to be remastered in the first place was because of the Xbox 360. Being part of the 7th generation of consoles, the Xbox 360 could only run the game at 720p at 30 FPS. Alan Wake, being native game to this console, had to be held back slightly because of it. The remaster runs at a stable 4K 60 FPS on new consoles, and Alan Wake got to release on platforms it has never seen, specifically the PlayStation and Nintendo Switch. Although the Switch port has already been met with backlash or poor performance, I personally would blame the console more than the game. Remember, the Switch released in 2017, and this hasn't been a problem solely for Alan Wake Remastered on the Switch. Crysis Remastered also has awful performance on the Switch, not even coming close to the performance requirements that PC, PlayStation, or Xbox have met. This remaster was actually outsourced to a studio called D3T, and let's just say that outsourcing a remaster or remake is always a bad idea, and if a developer or publisher want to deliver a quality product, they should have the original creators do it. That's probably going to be a rant for another video, not coming anytime soon. The actual substance of this remaster is minute. The biggest changes are visuals with improved lighting and ray tracing, improved textures, and the like. The most notable change, however, is Alan's face. Remedy thought it was appropriate to remodel Alan's face to look more similar to his real actor, Iko V. Lee. I personally like this change, since in the original, Alan was facially challenged with odd-looking expressions and just a general Xbox 360 bad graphics look. Another visual change is the sponsorships that had to be removed. Yes, Alan Wake had sponsorships because Microsoft and Xbox had absolutely no faith in how well the game would do. To name a few, some of the batteries had Energizer logos on them, and some billboards along the road had Ford truck ads. And if I remember correctly, the phone that Alan used was also a certain brand. The remaster also includes the 2 DLC episodes that I covered in Part 2. So if you didn't want to pay $14 on those 2 episodes back in 2010, then now is your chance to play them. 2 years after the release of Alan Wake, an Xbox Live Arcade game came out to continue the story. It was entitled Alan Wake's American Nightmare. Remedy actually wanted to make Alan Wake 2 at the time, but the project was scrapped and its remnants were put to use to make this game. It's much smaller in scope than the original Alan Wake and can be finished in around 2 to 3 hours. The story follows Alan, still in the dark place, having to defeat his evil twin, Mr. Scratch. There are only 3 levels during the entire story, with the player having to play them 3 times over, and it's as bad as it sounds. Alan also comes across different women in each level, helping him along the way. There's a better variety of enemies here, my favorite being a Taken that can turn into a flock of birds. It's just a fun concept, though they can be somewhat frustrating to fight against. There are also more weapons to mess around with, most of them now being fully automatic, which even Alan himself acknowledges. Though it's a sort of disconnect from the original in this aspect. In the first game, every gun you used would either be semi-automatic, some sort of action, or a single shot. But here, nearly every weapon takes less skill to use because of it being fully automatic. It's just one of those things that you don't think about until you no longer have. At the very least, the game has some good moments, and Mr. Scratch is a great antagonist at times, if not cliché. I'm not even sure if American Nightmare is even considered canon, with how insignificant and short it is, but it is a page in Alan Wake's history nonetheless, and at least it has a great unofficial theme song. Control is the most recent original game by Remedy, being released in 2019 and recently had its sequel announced. Probably the most surreal game they've made yet. It's set in the same universe as Alan Wake, with the release of its second DLC entitled AWE, or Altered World Event, expanded upon the story of Alan Wake. According to the story, Alan is still trapped in the dark place, and Dr. Hartman was actually turned into a Taken and is being held far below the oldest house with the rest of the investigation sector. Most of the DLC consists of chasing Hartman down, who now resembles that of a monster, and eventually defeating him. There were some great nods to Alan Wake in this DLC, such as having to pick up lights to burn patches of darkness out of the way. In the final showdown between us and Hartman, you must use a spotlight to carry generators to the other end of the room and make Hartman weak enough to fight. After defeating Hartman, there are 2 collectible files that we can see, and are an eerie reintroduction to Alan Wake. The first file explains that after all these years, Alan being missing his wife, Alice, still sees flashes of his figure in a certain place in her house. She then had a motion-activated camera installed there to prove it. The last file is a picture of what the camera captured. This DLC was also dedicated to Dr. Hartman's original voice actor, Mark Blum, who passed away shortly before release. Alan Wake 2 is a rare case. It has been in the works for a decade now and is finally going to be released early to mid-2023. Hopefully it will be worth the wait. Originally, like I mentioned before, the first build of Alan Wake 2 was in development until it wasn't, and its assets were reused to create American Nightmare. There is a gameplay demo of this original build that very well could be nothing but smoke and mirrors, but it does look pretty cool and includes some great concepts, more interactivity with the environment, puzzles, and new enemies. The original story was of 2 parallel stories, where a documentary is being made about Alan and his disappearance, and Alan having to fight off Mr. Scratch's influence. The latter part essentially became American Nightmare's story. The full video demo will be linked in the description. Apparently Remedy did want to make the sequel, but because they were still under the guise of Microsoft and Xbox, they would have to put it off, and in 2016 they released Quantum Break, which wasn't as successful. Shortly after, Remedy and Microsoft parted ways, and Remedy is now mostly independent, having full ownership of their IPs but still using publishers to ship their games to various platforms. Alan Wake 2 is to be published by Epic Games. The only traces of this new Alan Wake 2 set to release in just a matter of months is the reveal trailer, a handful of screenshots, and the Alan Wake anniversary video in which Sam Lake himself announced that the game was nearly finished, but there wouldn't be much further information coming out for a while. What we know so far is that the game takes place in the dark place and is much more of a survival horror game. The screenshots that we have so far paint a much darker picture than of the first game, with Alan being seen in a completely empty city and this creepy woman in a sewer. Personally, I can't wait to play it and possibly review it on this channel, but in the meantime, like and subscribe for more crap like this video.